Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation, Patent Prosecution, a Year in Review and a Look Ahead. I am Gail Martin, Associate Marketing Manager at Reed Tech, and I want to cover a couple things before we get started. Please feel free to submit questions during the conference by using the chat or Q&A feature. And we will be sending you a copy of the slides and a link to the recording from today's presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Chris Holt. Chris is a Vice President of Patent Analytics, LexisNexis Patent Advisor, and has over 15 years of experience as a patent attorney, specializing in U.S. and foreign patents. As the co-creator of Patent Advisor, Chris has helped bring transparency to the opaque patent prosecution process with never-before available patent data analytics. He is co-host of the LexisNexis IP Solutions podcast, Better Patents Now. Joining him will be Allie Morton. Allie is our IP Product Marketing Manager who will be filling in for Megan McLaughlin today. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Allie.
All right, great. Thanks, Gail. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We will go ahead and get started. As you know from when you signed up for the webinar today, our webinar is going to focus on patent prosecution, a year in review, and a look ahead. We're going to start with a look back at 2017 year in review in patent prosecution. So Chris, I want to turn it over to you and to explain a little bit, how has the role of big data in patent prosecution changed over the last year?
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is exciting today. I like to talk about these sort of high-level topics. And I should say that this is a year in review to some extent, through my eyes, because I think it would be unfair for me to say that I'm going to cover every trend in the business. So I really want to sort of cover this, as I see it from my perspective, and understand that my perspective is especially interested in data-driven prosecution decision-making. So let's start there, the role of big data. One of the interesting things that I have seen over the last year is that we are now going from a time when utilizing data to make a decision during patent prosecution was unusual to something that is becoming more must-have. So let's take a step back and sort of look at how this has happened in our industry. So in 2006, when I was about 6 years into being a patent attorney, we had the idea at my law firm, and we decided that, hey, we can take file histories and we can calculate what the RCE wait time would be. And that's all we set out to do, because we had a problem with one client in particular that, hey, when we file an RCE, sometimes it's taking like 2 months to hear back from the examiner, and sometimes it's taking 3 years to hear back from the examiner. And if I would know ahead of time that it's going to be 3 years, then I might not file an RCE. So we set out to collect enough file histories from a certain set of examiners so that we could keep track of what the wait time would be for receiving an RCE. That's all we intended to do. But really, it kind of opened a Pandora's box, because as more and more file histories were gathered, the opportunity to make data-driven prosecution decisions just grew. It's like, okay, look, as long as we're looking at the RCE wait time, I would like to know what is the allowance rate of this examiner, and it really just snowballed from there. But really what it grew into is that, there's always this set of early adopters. And when I look back on it, myself, Professor Shine Tu from the University of West Virginia, and there were a handful of what I will call sort of the dorks out there that really were going to, pay attention to ways to utilize this data to make decisions. But, there were not very many of us for a long time. And it wasn't really until you know, maybe around 2010, 2011, 2012, where some of the data started to get pushed out there. So what's happened in the last year that's especially interesting to me is that what used to be just a bunch of nerds utilizing data to try to make good decisions, it's now becoming an industry standard. Does that make sense, Allie?
Yeah.
You know, it's gone from being a nice to have to a must have, and part of that I think just comes with availability of tools like Patent Advisor and other analytics solutions in the market. So I mean, that's really I mean, it's really worth stopping to you know, understand what we're saying is that, you know, basically the entire practice has changed, because now instead of just guessing or using your judgment about whether to file an RCE, about whether to appeal, you know, now we're actually using data, and what's really crazy is most people are using data now.
So you kind of talked a little bit about, sorry, finish what you were saying, Chris.
No, please go ahead.
So you talked a little bit kind of about the dorks, as you'll call them, or the early adopters, and then now we're starting to see more of those laggards also adopting this idea in the thought of it's not necessarily a nice to have anymore, now it's becoming more of a must have. I know you're out in the field a lot talking about Patent Advisor and talking about patent analytics in general. What are some of the kind of objections you get from some of those laggards as to why they don't think they need this data or why they don't want to use it?
Well, you know, we definitely get some resistance from people that think like, you know what, ultimately it's not going to make a difference, that I would end up making the same decision regardless, you know. And my typical pushback point on that is really looking at the RCE example. So data isn't trying to you know, change the way that you make the decision as to whether to choose appeal or whether to choose RCE, in the sense of it's not going to be the only thing that you look at. But there are things about an application that you cannot see. There are forces working against you that traditionally you've not been able to see. So for example, you know, if it's going to take the examiner 3.5 years, and that's a fact because he has a giant stack of RCEs waiting on his desk and the wait time just is what it is, you know, how can you make an educated decision without that information if that information is available, right? And so, you know, we still get these people that are like, there's nothing that the statistics are going to tell me that is going to change my decision. And, you know, I think the majority of the market now realizes that that's just not true, right? And what's really interesting, yeah?
I know in the past when we've talked, you had said, and this was years ago as we were starting to kind of start talking about patent analytics, and one of the big pushback points was, I know my examiners. And it's like, well, that you can't really know your examiners. There's thousands and thousands of them. And yes, you may still work with some of the same examiners and the same art units and things like that, but you can't really truly know that stuff. And to your point earlier, even if you do, quote unquote, know your examiner, that you know how they interact with your applications. You don't know how they interact with all of the applications that they see because you didn't have that insight prior to being able to look at this type of big data.
Right. Statistics are nothing more than a way for you to learn from other people's experiences, right? So imagine when you're working with an examiner, if you could call everyone that has ever worked for that examiner before and ask them what their experiences were with your examiner, right? You're going to learn from that. They're going to say, you know what? He doesn't like pre-appeal. He's never allowed a pre-appeal case in his life, right? That's the anecdotal information you might get from your peers, but you can't call all those people. And so what statistics do is they communicate that to you, right? And but you know, what I think what's really been interesting in the last year is that, number one, that's really starting to dawn on people, is that, look, there are things that I can't know by looking just at my application, and I need to know those things. That's really in the last year begun to dawn on people. But you want to know what I think is driving adoption and what is driving us towards must-have instead of a nice-to-have? It's peer pressure, because at the end of the day, as patent attorneys, we're all competitive. We're all competitive in nature. And if I, as a patent attorney, can get a patent more quickly than you can and with fewer amendments, and I can use that as a marketing advantage to tell corporations that say, look, the law firm that is competing with me, they don't make data-driven decisions. They're not paying attention to the fact that the wait time for an RCE is 2.5 years. They're steering you down that path because they're only looking at their case. They're not looking at the things that they can't see, you know, but I am, and so therefore it really makes sense that I'm going to get you patents sooner, and ultimately that's going to cost you less, right? And so nobody wants their competitor to be able to tell prospects and companies that they can get patents faster and cheaper than you. So if you don't get on board, you're going to sort of get left behind, right?
Right.
And you know, that's always part of my sales pitch now is, you know, I want law firms to feel some insecurity, but I think it's completely reasonable that they do, because we now are at the point where literally there are hundreds of law firms that have access to prosecution data, and they're beginning to use it in their daily practice. So you really can't afford not to, right? And all of this has followed the trend. Yeah.
I was going to go on to the next topic, but go ahead and finish what you were saying.
No, I was just going to say, just to tighten up with this slide, is to say that we wouldn't be able to do this if the patent office wouldn't share the data. And the analytics that we have definitely followed the trend of the patent office releasing more information and making it easier to get. So then we're therefore able to make more accurate analytics and can control the process in more interesting ways.
And you've kind of touched on some of these top use cases for patent prosecution analytics in the stuff that you just covered on the previous slide. And you and Megan actually did a really great podcast that digs into some of these top uses. So we won't go in depth on that. And as you can see on the slide, you can listen to that at www.readtech.com/VPN. And it is episode number 28. And you can listen to them go in depth on each of these topics. But Chris is going to cover just kind of at a high level quickly through some of these top use cases for prosecution analytics.
Yeah, and I mean, and the trend here across these decision points is that, look, we are really becoming experts in the process once again. You know, you hire a patent attorney for a reason, and to handle your patent application. And the reason why you want to hire a patent attorney is you expect them to have special expertise about the process. And so when you can reinforce that value, reinforce, you know, what is your rate, reinforce that expertise, you know, then that's a bonus. And so here are some ways, because a lot of people I don't think realize how data has infiltrated our day-to-day decision-making. Pre-filing stage. So what we're talking about there is, look, there are certain pockets within the patent office that you want to avoid because the likelihood of getting a patent is lower, or the amount of time that it takes to get a patent is lower. And so, for example, how you characterize your invention. So if you take a single invention, let's say like a brush that is an improvement within a vacuum cleaner, you can characterize that brush in a lot of different ways. You can characterize it as a vacuum cleaner. You can characterize it as a brush. You can characterize it as a dust removal system or a particle sweeper. All of those ways are different ways to characterize the invention, and all of them will take you to different corners within the patent office. And normally, we've never cared about that, right? We don't really care where our application lands within the patent office, but now we do, because there are some corners within the patent office that you want to avoid, and there are some that are more beneficial. So if you can know ahead of time, you know, which examiners are favorable and which are less favorable, then you can optimize for your client, or if you're a company, you can optimize your filing strategy. So if I'm a medical device company, I could say, look, we're going to start characterizing our medicated stents as this instead of that, because we want to end up with a different group of examiners because we can see that the statistics are more favorable. So statistics come into pre-filing for some practitioners. I believe that the most important point in any prosecution of a patent application is when you receive your first office action. And the reason why I say that is that some applications are, you know, have a very bad outlook on the day that you receive your first office action. So take appeal, for example. You know, normally practitioners have not used appeal until they get late in prosecution, and let's say after their second RCE, then they will consider appealing. But if you are with an examiner that the outlook with that examiner looks especially bleak, you know, to use tactics, whether it be appeal, whether it be aggressive interviewing, whether it be getting the supervisor involved, using more aggressive techniques when you receive your first office action is going to allow you to achieve an outcome that you probably wouldn't have achieved. You know, why wait, you know, 5 years and 2 RCEs to file an appeal when there's probably a good reason why you might want to file it earlier? Again, it's about the things that you cannot see, the forces that are acting against you. Speaking of interviews, you know, some examiners like to talk, and some of them do not. Most of them do. But you can sort of see, okay, look, in the last 2 years, how has my examiner responded to interviews? You know, does he allow cases at a very high rate, or does he not? Then after final decision making, so we've already talked about that, like do you file an RCE, do you not file an RCE, you know, do you appeal, do you use the after final decision making pilot program, those kinds of things. Appeal decision making is also on there. So we go through these in a lot more detail in our Better Patents Now podcast episode number 28. So if anybody wants to get more strategic, then you can listen to that podcast.
So one of the things that we've talked a lot about, a common theme here, is all about the data, right? How having more data gives you more insight and things like that. But like with all things, any sort of database decisions that you're making are only as good as the data going into those decisions. So what are some of the pitfalls that we need to look out for to identify bad data or know that we're receiving bad data and that we're not making decisions based on that data?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to our really dork days when there were not very many of us that were dabbling with this kind of data, you know, our philosophy was any data is better than having no data at all, because we were really kind of the first ones to begin making decisions that way. And so, you know, if we could have 100 cases from an art unit or from or 10 cases from an examiner, you know, that was a lot better than none. But we're at a point today where you should expect higher data quality to fuel your decisions, or else you risk making the wrong decision. So if you have a data set that is missing big chunks out of the middle of it, then, you know, there's a possibility that you're going to make a bad decision, or that you're going to be making a decision based on data that is incomplete, which is not something that you want to do. The other issue is, you know, outdated. The most important office actions for you to take into consideration are the ones that happened most recently, right? So if you're dealing with an analytics service that is not well updated, or if it's missing big chunks of data, I mean, these are questions that you need to ask. You know, how complete is your data? How outdated is that data? These are things that you should be taking into consideration, because now that all companies and all law firms are going to begin to use this data, you might as well invest in the best tool that you can get. Same thing with, instead of, if this isn't all about looking at examiners and the patent office, it's also, as we'll talk about probably later, is, it's also looking at your own performance or looking at your competitors' performance. And so assigning applications to the correct law firm, so having the correct links between law firm and application, and having the correct links between the corporation and the assignment records being accurately accounted for, those things really, really matter. So we are past the point of any data is better than no data, because you really should have high expectations, because good quality data is available in the market. It's also important to make sure that you're looking at the right perspective, right? And so if someone is giving you statistics about the entire patent office, so in fact, and I encourage the patent office to continue to give us statistics, and I love the statistics that they give us, but the statistics they give us are global. So they tell us that, the time for picking up an RCE is X amount of months. But that doesn't really matter at all when I'm making day-to-day decisions for my portfolio, right? Because what really matters is, for my examiner, what is the RCE wait time, right? Or my art unit, what is the RCE wait time? So if someone is giving you a high-level statistic instead of being able to really hone in on the context that is important to you, then you should be wary of that. Accounting for important variables. So a good system and a good source of data is going to allow you to filter in lots of different ways, because you need to be able to ask the question, okay, look, if I get a static data sheet and I can't filter that data to include or exclude certain cases, whether maybe you only want to look at cases that are foreign originated, or maybe you want to exclude cases that are foreign originated. So once you're looking at a trend that you see in the data, you may want to filter out some variables to make sure that that trend still holds true and is not, colored by some considerations that may change the outcome. Does that make sense, Allie? We're getting into the weeds.
Yeah, and it's actually great and leads up to the next slide and topic that we wanted to cover here. So we talked a little bit about the main use cases of patent prosecution analytics from a patent prosecution perspective. And then on the last slide, you talked a little bit about how there are other ways to use this data as well. So I thought we could dig a little deeper in here to some of the other use cases.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people realize that, they hear about patent office analytics and they think, oh, those are examiner reports, right? But think about it. If you have all of the prosecution file histories, so if you have 6 or 7 million file histories, this is what I like to tell people. Imagine they're all paper files in a gymnasium. So in a gymnasium, there's 7 million files. Some of them are patented cases, some of them are abandoned, some of them are pending. They're in every status you can imagine. So when we do examiner analytics, we go into the gymnasium and we grab all the files that are handled by a certain examiner, and we take them into a conference room and we calculate the decisions. We're using computers to do that, but conceptually that's what we're doing. But there's no reason why we can't go into that gymnasium and grab all of the applications handled by a certain law firm in the last 5 years, right? And we can take those applications into a conference room and generate analysis about, let's say, how good is this law firm at prosecuting medical device cases? And why might we be doing that? Well, we might be doing it because my law firm might be trying to win a bigger share of work away from that law firm, right? Or I might do it because it is my law firm and I want to show that we're really exceptionally good at, medical device cases. So savvy law firms now, and especially the big law firms, to be quite honest, are making pitches using data. And really savvy law firms are also going into that gymnasium and grabbing all the applications associated with their own law firm, especially the pending ones, and they're looking across those applications and they're saying, hey, look, we have a lot of cases that have, where we've made the decision to appeal after a second RCE. So we're going to do training within our law firm to make appeal decisions earlier in prosecution. How can we use data to help us intervene earlier? Because ultimately that will help the statistics of our firm, and having better statistics will ultimately help us win business. So a lot of people haven't begun to realize that, look, generating stats from this data, if you do it carefully and accurately, is a tremendous business development tool. Patent valuation, to me, a lot of that is like, think of it as patent pending valuation. So if you have two pending applications that you're buying in a transaction, let's say, and one of them is assigned to an examiner that has, a 6% allowance rate, and the other one is assigned to an examiner that has a 90% allowance rate, and both of them have been filed and don't have a first office action yet, which one are you going to pay more for, right? So the examiner that you have is essentially a forecast of the likelihood that you will get a quality patent. And so that being the case, then it has some impact on how much that pending application is worth. So we've kind of covered competitive analysis, just like you could go into the gym and grab a law firm's cases, you could grab a competitor's cases in a specific area and see how prosecution has gone for them. And I keep using medical device as an example because I'm in Minneapolis, which is like, headquarters for medical devices. I once had a medical device company here in town tell me that when we set our budget at X amount of dollars to get a patent. And I said, you set that budget regardless of whether it's a stent case or a catheter case or another device? And they were like, yeah, because, but in reality, you can set your budget, specific to the examiners that you have, because what it might cost to get a stent case is not necessarily the same cost as getting a catheter case, for example. And so, why would you just assume that all examiners are the same? Because that just doesn't match reality. So measuring performance, I want to really point out the first example that I used is, a law firm doing self-evaluation, right? How good are we at prosecution? And I have a question, actually, that has come through the question interface that says, how do you know if you are good at incorporating big data into your workflow at a law firm? So a good benchmark to use is to say, how good are we at getting patents at the examiner's average or less than average? So if we have an examiner that has a very difficult, let me take one step back. What makes a good patent attorney and what makes a good patent law firm? So if you have an easy examiner, anybody can handle that case, right? Getting an allowance from an examiner with a 95% allowance rate is easy for any firm and is easy for any attorney. But if you have a very difficult examiner, what makes a good attorney or a good law firm is someone that can realize that they have a difficult examiner early in prosecution and then adapt their strategy in order to keep from getting a bad result. And so if you really want to self-evaluate, how good are we at using big data, the question becomes, how good are we at avoiding bad outcomes when we have a difficult examiner? And so that is how, and that becomes a message that you can use in marketing is that, look, we looked at your portfolio company And your cases that have easy examiners, okay, that's fine and dandy, but look how good we are at getting good outcomes when cases are actually difficult. So, you know, the benchmark can be the examiner. So that might be number of office actions per grant. If an examiner averages 5 office actions per grant, and you have found ways to get, you know, grants in 2 that don't involve taking all the value out of the claims, you know, that becomes very compelling. So law firms can do self-evaluation by looking at data. How good are we at dealing with difficult examiners? How can we focus training on dealing with difficult examiners? But then there's, you know, there's also the corporations are going to want to evaluate their law firms. So the corporation can pull data on the law firm and say, how good are they at getting cases from difficult examiners? So all of these ways, and so if using big data in patent prosecution is new to you, you're probably overwhelmed right now because, you know, you just found out that the entire industry has been turned upside down and is now using objective data to compete with each other. So don't panic. There's still time to become an expert.
I think that pretty much wraps up all of the stuff that we had for the look back at patent prosecution in 2017. Any overarching comments you want to kind of end with before we move on to a look ahead?
You know, I think the big trend is that what used to be a nice to have is rapidly becoming a must have. And, you know, if you are an associate at a law firm, and let's suppose you just are starting your career, then you absolutely want to have access to the best tools available for utilizing data in all the ways that we just talked about, because that's the future of the patent prosecution industry. You know, you want to have your career is going to require you to have this category of expertise. And, you know, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. 3 years ago, I would have said, look, if you have these tools, you have a competitive advantage. But what I'm telling you is that after this past year, that yes, you can still get a competitive advantage. You're still going to be ahead of some people, but the fact of the matter is that it's becoming a tool that you must have.
And that actually leads us right into the next area. So can you talk a little bit about some of the emerging trends that you're seeing? We kind of touched on some, but dig in a little more, and then maybe what you think will be some of the major developments that are coming in 2018 and a little beyond.
Yeah, and you know, let me start. Let's take a breath here in the middle here. We've kind of reached the middle of the webinar, and let's take a breath for a second. And because, you know, that's a lot to take in, you know, in terms of what has happened in the last year. It really has been, you know, we focused on big data because I think that's really the most important thing that has happened in the last year. But let's stop for a second and think about this. You know, I read a book recently that was talking about, you know, Moore's Law and computer power doubling every year and a half, right? Or 2 years. You know, it depends on which model that you subscribe to. But the power of computers is becoming so significantly more every year that inevitably that's having an impact on what we're able to do in terms of building information tools. And, you know, there's this story of a king that liked to play chess. And that king, in this book that I was reading, it was talking about this king that said, if anybody comes to me and wants to play me in chess and they beat me, I will give you any reward that you ask for. And so, and I'm telling you my version of how I remember the story. So along came this guy who said, okay, look, I will play you in chess, and if I win, all I want is a single grain of rice to be put in one square, in the, let's say, the top left corner. And then in the second square, I want you to double it and put 2 grains of rice. And then in the next square, I want you to double it and put 4 grains of rice. And all I want you to do is to do that for all of the squares on the chessboard. And then I will have enough to feed my family and their people, and so I will play you for this reward. So they played, and lo and behold, the challenger won. And so if you really look at what happened there, that really quickly, only when you get to like the 3rd row of the chessboard, the grains of rice become, the number of grains of rice becomes so significant that, you know, all the grain in the land by the time you get to the end of the chessboard has been drained from the economy. The king has essentially no rice. And, you know, it's the same thing with computing power. Like, we are actually only in, you know, like the 2nd or 3rd row of that chessboard, and we're at a point now where every time the computer power doubles again in a year, year and a half, it is just extraordinary what you're able to do with technology. And what happens is that in our industry, that's having an impact on the tools, right? Because the things with you can do with computers are going crazy. And so that's where I want to start with emerging trends for next year, is that the stuff that I have seen happening is mind-blowing. It really is mind-blowing. So I have seen experimenters, so not yet commercial products. I have seen people working on engines that will automatically draft a patent application from scratch, including the drawings, including the specification, including the claims. And the output is not very good. It's crappy. But what's scary is that I can see the path between where they're at now and where they might be able to draft an application that is 80% complete. So imagine that for a second. So it may not be a tool that completely replaces us as patent drafters, but if you have a tool that gets you 80% there and the remaining work is, you know, 80% less than what you used to have to do, I mean, that's pretty incredible, because what's going to happen then is that the cost, unfortunately, that attorneys get paid for drafting applications will go down, and the number of applications that companies file will go up, which is a good thing for practitioners. But then the patent office is going to get another surge of filings, right? And eventually they're not going to be able to keep up again. And not only that, but if they hire more examiners, they're going to find out what they found out the last time, is that, you know, hiring people is a good way to increase capacity, but it also creates complexity of the system. And so, you know, and if you don't believe me in relation to drafting applications automatically, well, the tools for writing office action responses are becoming more impressive. And so what really happens with all of that computing power is that the tools in the market adapt so fast that even we as people have a hard time keeping up with the technology and with the change. And so I think over the next year, we're going to see some incredible smart technology, automation and tools. I mean, our company is working on these things. There's lots of really cool startup companies out there that are working on these things. So you can expect to see some tools that will help with efficiency that will be mind-blowing. So maybe it will just be generation 1 in this next year, but those that embrace that technology and, you know, learn how to refine it for their own purposes, you know, they're going to be ahead of the game. So, Allie, I hate to say it, there's a lot of insecurity for practitioners, but certainly we're not the only industry that is under attack by technology. Kind of scary, right?
it is a little scary when you think about it, but you can put a different spin on it, I guess, and think about if you can automate some of those processes, then that opens up more time to do other things. We all live in the world today where we have too many things to do, not enough time to do it. So maybe it will help improve some of those other areas that don't get a lot of attention right now. You talked kind of about this in I think the chess example is a really good example of this, and then you were saying how it will improve efficiency. The more time you have, the more patent applications can be filed, then that's the more patent applications that the patent office will need to deal with and will need to be able to pass through there. Anything else you want to add on this one? Then we'll dig in a little deeper around how some of these new emerging trends around measuring success.
Well, I mean, I want to go back to your point, actually, just to make everyone feel a little bit better, is that, you know, as the grunt work of being a patent attorney, which actually has largely been the part that most of us have despised the most over the last 10, 15 years, the really heavy lifting grunt work of writing a patent application, look, when those things become easier, you know, your point, what you made a second ago, is very interesting. It frees up your time to do other things. Well, the expertise that comes from big data is going to be a way that we add value again, right? So it's going to become, look, you know, once we decide to draft the application, it's not going to take that long to do, but I can help you decide which application to draft, right? And I can help you decide how to draft it so that it goes to the most favorable circumstances. And then when you get back the rejection, maybe it doesn't take that much work to prepare the response, but I can help you tailor the response to optimize, you know, the best outcome, right? And I can help you choose which path to take through the process in order to optimize the best outcome. So the way that we add value beyond just the grunt work is you know, it's going to have to change, because if you do not have any expertise to add extra value, I'm telling you that you're going to be in big trouble, because there are firms out there that I know of that are like, how can we, so when I was early in my practice, there was this big trend towards, like, you know, could we outsource prosecution work out of the United States? And everybody was worried about that, look, the amount of money that we make as patent drafters and response drafters in the U.S. is going to go down. We were all very worried about that. But the next thing to worry about now is automation. And you should be worried about your competitor, because if they can automate a lot of the work that goes into preparing applications and responses, then they can charge a lower price. And unfortunately, it's going to cause, you know, our fees to go down again, and nobody wants to hear that. But in reality, that's going to happen. I think it's almost unavoidable. The other thing we have to worry about is, you know, and if you're corporations, maybe you're not looking at it as worrying about it. I'm kind of speaking like a lawyer, but, you know, you might be able to bring in a lot more work in-house, right? Because it's going to become more efficient to do that. So if you want to thrive in the new environment, then you need to be in a position to add expertise and add value. So yeah, you can draft an application, but, you know, those one-size-fits-all junk applications that come out of those algorithms, you know, that's not what you want. What you want is to train the algorithm to optimize your strategy, and let me do that for you, right? So,
and to that point, being able to, we talked about a little in the past with some of the use cases, measuring, defining what success looks like now, setting benchmarks, being able to compare yourself to other lawyers within your same firm, being able to compare yourself to your competitors if you're a law firm, being able to take a look at your outside counsel if you're a corporation and evaluate them and say, how are they performing in this art unit, and things like that. So that leads us right into this slide here around the new standards for measuring success and kind of setting the new norm. In the past, it was, yeah, they do a good job for us, so we keep using them as our outside counsel, and you couldn't really put a lot of statistics around it. And now we're able to provide the type of data to set that benchmark and say, here you go, here's what the USPTO average is for this particular art unit. Here's how you compare to it as a law firm or as an individual lawyer, things like that. So it's really kind of shifting that into your point of needing to become more competitive and needing to make sure that you know, where do you rank? If your corporations are getting these reports and looking at these, where do you as a law firm fall in this list of other law firms that they're evaluating? And on the flip side, if you're a law firm, how do you compare to your competitors, and how can you use that in business development pitches and things like that? So
I think you're exactly right. I will tell you that we do get pushback sometimes on this, and what people will say is that, like, look, you know, if I want to have a high allowance rate, you know, I can basically the saying that the numbers can be fudged. And that's actually, it's obviously true. I mean, you could get a patent as quick as you want to get a patent if you're willing to accept low value. But when I go and I make this pitch, if I'm a law firm and I'm pitching to a company, I'm not just pitching that we have great numbers. What I'm pitching is how we get great numbers. So if I can show the numbers and the numbers are compelling, that's one thing. But listen, when I say to that company, like, look, we get better results, and it's because we don't just file an RCE. We decide whether the right choice is to file an RCE in light of what everyone else's experiences have been with this specific examiner. And look, with this specific examiner, which you've had 22 times, you filed an RCE every single time on your first final rejection, and every single time you had to wait 3 years. So when I was still practicing, that was a major compelling sales point for me. So don't get lost in the numbers. You know, focus on the fact that you can get better results if you're looking at the implications that go beyond the application you're working on. That's the sales pitch, right? So, you know, we have a question. Sorry, no, there's a question I noticed that came in.
Go ahead.
And it's a good question, a very good question, which is, do all patent offices release this type of data, or is it only confined to the U.S. Patent Office? So the real question there is that, so the best patent office analytic tools in the market right now are U.S. only. But having this data, and you know, I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to give away too much of our roadmap, but I don't think it's too much to say that you can absolutely count on analytic tools for other patent offices. I mean, that's just an obvious statement, right? Allie, wouldn't you say? Okay, I'll blow the cover. It's definitely on our roadmap, and I don't think that would be a surprise to anyone, because, you know, if we can do this for the U.S. Patent Office, we can do it for a lot of other patent offices. So, you know, you can count on it, and not only that, but you can count on the entrepreneurial spirit of lots of small companies and individuals out there that see the opportunity, because, you know, it's an obvious opportunity.
And I think let's go ahead and talk about some of where we see things going when looking more at our specific tool, LexisNexis Patent Advisor. But let's do a quick recap of some of the major enhancements that we had in 2017, because things have changed a lot over the course of the last year. So I will just kind of turn it over to you to go quickly through some of these slides, and then we'll wrap up by talking about some of the additional things that you see coming in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things we did in 2017 was to update the look and feel of our analytics research tool. and to bring it up to date with modern standards, because when we first designed and built the system, it was 2006. So we did a modernization of our UIs, and we are going to have a real focus in 2008 on user experience and really just bringing out some of the things that are unique about our tool to allow you to take advantage of them in a way that is intuitive and easy to use. So the tool that we have now is going to become much easier to use and much better in 2018. And it's already intuitive, it's already easy to use, but we're going to incorporate things like tutorials and things that will help you with specific use cases in particular. Prosecution pattern monitoring, this is something that is especially interesting about what we do, because if you are we can monitor your private pair cases, and so all the office actions that you file, all the new applications that you file, all of the updates, we can monitor that for you in real time, and then we can watch for almost any pattern that you can imagine that happens within a file history. So why would you be doing that? So, maybe if you're a corporation, maybe you want to monitor for certain things that your outside counsel does because that's not what you want them to do. Maybe there are quality implications. Maybe you don't want, if you're a law firm, you don't want people filing right before a deadline, for example, right? And, I can't even begin to tell you all of the reasons and all of the use cases for monitoring prosecution events. We could do a whole webinar on that sometime. But we've really invested in increasing the options there. A very popular enhancement has been, we have a text search tool. So a side effect of downloading every published file history imaginable and all of the documents and OCRing them and extracting metadata. So that's kind of nerd talk for having a great database of file history documents, is that we can make them text searchable, and that's what we do. And so we've added petitions and terminal disclaimers and other documents that you can free text search. So use case, most popular use case is looking at your examiner's 101 history, for example, and overcoming your examiner's rejections by looking at how other practitioners have overcome similar rejections. I mean, again, the use cases are, go on and on and on, but, we now have a lot more documents in here that people are interested in. So those were some of the big things for 2017. And so we actually took out some slides here because when we were preparing this slide deck, I put all of our really cool roadmap stuff for 2018 into the slide deck here. And immediately when people were looking at the slide deck, they're like, Chris, you can't tell everyone what we're doing in 2018 because, that's a secret. And that's a bummer for me, but all I can say is hold on to your hat, because we are spending a tremendous amount of money in this space. We're heavily invested in being at the forefront of prosecution analytics, and that's why I'm with this company today, is because it's my passion, and it's a well-funded passion with our company. And I don't mean that to brag or anything else. What I mean is that, come along for the ride is what I'm saying, because the things that we're coming out with in the next 12 months are really super cool, and we have a fantastic roadmap. So you just have to take my word for it for now.
Chris is a very believable person and very trustworthy, so I would say just hold on to your hats. We are getting close to running out of time here, so I want to go ahead and address that if we didn't get to your question, we have them all captured and we have your contact information. We will make sure that we do address your question and answer to you directly if we can't get to it while we're on this call. Here is Maria's contact information. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to her. You can also see the URL to find out more information about Patent Advisor. And we will be sending out the slides and the recording of the webinar presentation to everybody that registered and attended today, so you will get copies of that. Wanted to go ahead and say thank you to Chris for the great presentation, and thank you to everybody for joining. And we do have a few minutes, so if there's any questions in here, Chris, can you see the questions?
Yes, I see. How do we determine the grant percentage rate of an examiner? Is it displayed by the respective patent offices? And the answer is that the patent offices will not give you that information. You have to have access to a commercial solution to do that. And I would highly recommend LexisNexis Patent Advisor as that commercial solution. I will give you a hint. Also, we have a release coming out in February, and we're going to be doing a big kickoff where I don't want to say too much, and I know Allie's like probably saying, okay, Chris, don't say too much, but you know, we have discovered some new analytics that have incredible power, and we've invested a lot in reverse regression testing to find analytics that are better than allowance rate. Let's put it that way. And, you know, we have a lot of exciting things coming beginning in February with the focus on, you know, giving you great, easy-to-use metrics that will give you a great return on using analytics but not suck up too much of your time. So if you want analytics, if you want examiner-specific analytics, you're not going to get them from the patent office. You got to get them from a commercial solution. That's the answer to that question. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. I think that covers most of the questions. There's a couple more here, but they're kind of redundant. I think we covered them.
And we'll go back through, like I said, and if there's any that we missed, we'll make sure and reach out to you individually to address your question. Thank you again, Chris, and thank you to everybody for attending today.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.